Creativity can be one of those buzzwords that it's difficult to actually implement into the classroom. Today I talked to Mike Cicchetti, a digital video production teacher in Volusia County, who's using creativity to ignite that spark of learning.
Welcome to Focus on K-12, EdTech and the Education Experience. I'm your host, Doug Konopelko, Education Strategist at CDWG. So let's dive in as we focus on K-12.
Good morning, Doug. Appreciate you having me on this morning. Mike Cicchetti. I'm currently an educator in Volusia County Schools, Florida. Previous roles served in learning technology specialist, which assisted and supported district-wide implementations and usage for purposeful technology infusion inside the classroom and for business ventures. And then immediately moved into the director role where I got to lead the entire technology effort for the district, which is the size of Rhode Island and a massive amount of about 70,000 total students and staff. So it was a very exciting time and definitely something I'm looking forward to using in my educator world as I am in now.
Thanks, Mike. So as someone who's both a creative educator and also an educator who teaches a subject that relies heavily on creativity, how does that play a role in your classroom?
You know, it's a great question. I think creativity for me has pretty much stayed with me since birth. There's several TED Talks out there that, of course, dive into creativity and when it disappears from our students. And so for me as an educator, it's something that I really always want to become nourishing of, no matter when I meet them and where I meet them. And so for me, teaching digital video technology, it's definitely one of those programs where you can't come in bland, and you definitely don't want to shoot from the hip with inexperience. And so for me, in my education and my background as an artist, I definitely try to infuse a lot of that in, but also bring out a lot of what my students are looking for in this modern day. Video as we knew it in the past is definitely not what video is, what we know now. It's fast, it's furious, it's short, sometimes direct to the point, but also it's an amazing experience for students to be able to understand how technology and a message can be visually appealing for an audience.
Yeah, so how do you take all of those things, right? Because there's been so many shifts and there's so many skills and new skills and programs and things to learn, right? How do you take all that, but also still foster that creativity in your students?
Awesome. You know, I'll take you to recent events. Obviously, most of us remember spring 2020 as a time where things just changed, right? They came out of nowhere, and we had to adapt. And so in that time frame, in that spring time frame, when I shifted from a district level position and I wanted to bring that knowledge and that infusion down into the classroom with a high school level, 9 through 12, I started to develop a process, a framework, so to speak, that I dubbed ADAPT, ADAPT, Absolve, Discover, Appoint, Prescribe, Teach. And for me in the spring, it really took a hold of my daily ventures with my students. It's something that we had to understand together, that we were going to progress together, and we can't do this alone. And that's just true for education in general. And so when I think back to the spring, I had dabbled, you know, like many educators, on certain tools and certain use cases, but never was I fine-tuning the exact usage to what needs we had, you know, day in and day out. It was kind of experimental, and if it worked, great. If it didn't, we knew what not to go with. And so using the ADAPT model, it was something that we, as my class, my students and myself, together formed and had a shared vision and direction for where we're going to go at learning.
So tell me a little more about ADAPT and how that plays out in the classroom, because you said your students were a big part of it.
Absolutely. More often than not, I always start with informal and formal surveys. I'm definitely a big communicator with anyone, whether it's my staff and or my students, no matter what. And so conversation just helps drive. I always found that it's exceedingly valuable to have, you know, conversations right from the beginning and not linger, because time can be better served later when you understand exactly where you all want to go. And so more often than not, with the Absolve portion, the first letter A in ADAPT model, it's together just kind of clearing the air and understanding that there are challenges that we're going to face, and there's exciting, you know, points of venture ahead. And so we have to understand that, accept it, and seek where we're going to go together on that end. And so from that point, we then begin a discover phase. And in there, I start to take a look at, again, through informal, formal surveys and direct conversation, what tools are they used to? What tools have they experienced in the past? I need to know where they are to be able to understand where I can bring myself and or bring us together if they are pretty much at the same level or not with me. And so we discover certain apps that are going to make our course in digital video technology excel, not just stay stagnant or stay at the level that it was formerly in. From there, after we do our discovery phase, we test, we experiment a little bit together, and we start to smile and frown, and that's okay, in terms of figuring things out together so that you're a more cohesive unit going forward. But then we begin to appoint what tools we're going to go forward with. You don't want to just come in with a plethora of tools. It's kind of like a restaurant. You don't bring a buffet of seafood when you're a vegetarian. You need to understand what those the resources are that you're going to prescribe. And so we appoint and then we prescribe. At that point, we are basically identifying what tools we're going to go with, what areas we're going to focus that tool usage on, what purpose we're trying to get out of it, and then we teach. And that's the last portion of the ADAPT model.
That's excellent. So a lot of educators are not in the more creative space, right? When we look at the schools, really a bulk of our educators are in those core subject areas. So what tips would you give educators that are in core subject areas to help them inject more creativity into their classroom and into their work?
Absolutely. I think even the ADAPT model right away for that particular question hits home for a lot of the core educators. I know in my current role as a digital video technologist, I'm in an exploratory course. And so I get to have the time to expand a student's knowledge, but also collaborate with the core teachers, because I want to make sure that I'm infusing what they're also leaving my classroom with or coming in from. And so if core educators can begin to absolve themselves of the burden of being labeled core, because that comes with a lot of context behind it. You are the core, of a student's educational experience, and we're kind of exploring stuff over on this side. And so if they can absolve themselves of feeling like rigidity needs to be the primary focus of a day, I think they begin, at least in my experience, they begin to ask a lot more questions. And those questions are what I personally, for myself, love to engage in. It's understanding where they are day in, day out. What struggles are they having as educators? Even if it's just a supplantive type, tool that can kind of get them ahead of the curve on where they are and get them time back to have those in-depth conversations with their students. That's where I feel teachers that are in those core areas or teachers that don't believe that they're creative because somehow during their life, it was pulled from them at some point, how they can infuse it back in. And so a lot of conversation, definitely being open. Social media is a major tool at this point. It's something that I know since the spring, if not way before, just has so many valuable tools with teachers just like ourselves, and district leaders and ed tech vendors just out there ready to support and help prescribe, when they're ready for that.
So I know that you're a very gifted artist, and I've seen some of your work, and I've seen you post some of your paintings. So I imagine that digital video production was a bit of a stretch as well for you, right? Getting ahead and getting ready for that role, as we all do when we start a new teaching role. And it seems like a lot of how we learn, both as students and adults, has shifted. So you mentioned social media has become a big part of your learning. Tell me a little bit more about other tools and resources that you use to get ready, to be more adept at digital video production.
Sure. I'd say for myself, I'm an anomaly, no doubt, having come from the world of technology, leading the effort and kind of bridging a lot of the gaps that we had as a large district, as well as just bridging a lot of conversations with vendors that most teachers don't get the chance to have those in-depth conversations with. So I'm an anomaly on that side, but at the same point, I still value the district resources that we have. I would always venture to request and inquire with an educator, no matter what district they're serving in, to seek out your district leadership, those that are in those roles that have that time to expand on whether it's tools or the infusion of technology and really find your purpose for and integrating it. You have to have a purpose. You just don't want to start with a tool just because everyone's doing it. There's a reason for that tool, to be in place. And that's questions that you should ask and inquire about no matter what. So for myself, coming from a static artist where it was a lot of paint and a lot of Photoshop work, very static imagery, it wasn't too big of a leap to go to video. You still are telling a story. And I think for artists in general, you always want to have a summary in your head before you even begin, because you want to be able to have that story be told at the end, with variations, of course, because art generally tells its own story, no matter who the viewer is. And so jumping into the video, for me, it was just really learning the programs that help serve the digital video technology course. And so those were held through Adobe. So for myself, I immersed in training right off the bat, a lot of web tools, Gmetrics being one of them, Adobe being another, but I immersed myself very quickly. So I had to be certified, and I put a goal to myself to be certified in less than 2 weeks in all major Adobe Suite products, Premiere Pro, Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign. And I met that goal. And After Effects is my next one. But at that same time, it's just a lot of good conversation with my district counterparts, colleagues that are in other neighboring districts as well. I try to build a network and build that collaborative, open dialogue, between anyone that I can reach out to. I definitely never fail to ask a question, because even if it's no, at least I asked.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned that you use a lot of the Adobe suite, right? But what are some of the other tools that you're using in your classroom with your students? Maybe, in addition to just the video production, right? Now that we've got students at home, students, also in class, what does that balance look like, and what are the different tools you use?
Great question. So the various tools that I was able to discover, appoint, and then prescribe for the teaching that I have going on, several of the larger ones that really integrate well in our ecosystem. Microsoft Teams is a major player in that role. It's been fantastic for collaboration, open dialogue, communication, file sharing, and the like, especially reaching out to parents using our PSTN that we have set up here for voice call and voicemail. Canvas and Structure is our LMS that we utilize as well. And we have a lot of our coursework, our LTI integrations, which is an IMS global standard for any of our resources. So going back to the ADAPT model, if you have resources and you've sought your district counterparts to see what's supported and what's available, you also want to make sure that the integration is seamless as well. And so that's definitely number one in a lot of the big questions that I have after I'm ready to prescribe a tool. So Microsoft Teams, Canvas and Structure, we are a big ClassLink district, and so we call it our V portal, but that's our single sign-on, our SSO solution, so that we can get students in and to their resources quickly and remove that hassle of rostering and where do I go with it? What tab is that? What desktop icon do I have to click on at this point for my favorites? So those are some of our major resources. Of course, you have your digital textbooks through adoptions, but more often than not, we are utilizing Nearpod quite often. I believe it's a tool that really opened up the adventures of teachers who were into that PowerPoint phase, which is a valuable tool altogether, but it began to make it a lot more interactive. And so those are some of our major tools that we're using inside the classroom and out.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your work with us today, Mike.
Absolutely, Doug. I appreciate it, and I wish you all well, and enjoy the rest of 2020.
Thanks. It'll be exciting. Thanks for joining us today on Focus on K-12 EdTech and the Education Experience. If you enjoyed today's show, please feel free to like, subscribe, and click the little bell so that you get notified whenever we post a new episode. If you have an idea for a future guest, or just want to talk about the show, either post something in the comments below or reach out to me on Twitter at @dconopelco. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time as we focus on K-12.